Welcome to Beyond the Chutes, the rodeo podcast that dives deep into the heart of Western culture. I'm your host, Doug Simcox, and here we explore it all. Rodeo's rich histories, the legends and their stories, today's competitors shaping the sport, and the behind-the-scenes heroes who make it happen. From bucking chutes to timed events, from rodeo history to current events, this is your all-access pass to the world of rodeo. Our show is presented by Parasite Systems, who help vet clinics and animal owners experience the power of sight. New in 2025, the all-in-one analyzer featuring fecal site AI, hemosite AI, and flow site AI technology. You can find them at parasitesystems.com. Marty Martins is our guest on this 128th episode of our podcast. Now, Marty was a college and pro rodeo cowboy, a rancher, a rodeo announcer, an editor, a lawyer, and an award-winning state prosecutor for the state of California. And as we will see in an upcoming episode, a published author. This episode was recorded after I returned from St. Tite, Quebec, around the first week of September. So here is Marty Martins as he remembers the rodeo opening that the rodeo announcer Curly Dundon would open his show with.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome indeed to the rodeo. Rodeo or rodeo, either way, either being correct, both come from the Spanish verb rodear, meaning to round up or to circle. Now, if you'll focus your attention to Grand Entry Gate, where civilization ends and the Wild West begins.
Welcome to Beyond the Chutes is presented by Parasite Systems. I'm your host today, Doug Simcox. Today I'm recording in our studio here in Taylorsville, Kentucky. We are deep in the rodeo season. Labor Day is come and gone, and there are still a lot of rodeos to get to. But St. Tite, which is kind of the bookend of the big summer run, that was last week. Had an opportunity to go up there, hang out. Got to see a lot of great friends. Dale Yerrigan was up there. Sylvain Bourgeois, of course, B.J. Prince, all rodeo cowboys. And just had a lot of fun working with Vanessa. She's communications director for the Western Festival de St. Tite. And really appreciated going up there recording in their studio. But I am back home, and we want to say to everybody on here, we appreciate your long travels that you guys have had all summer, and we appreciate you including us in those travels, those long runs, those overnights, all kind of weather and traffic. And I hope you've been able to imagine us sitting in your passenger seat, imagine us on the way. Hopefully, we've been able to keep you entertained and keep you awake as you make those big, long overnight runs. And just a reminder, as you are out there as the season rolls on, eyes up. If you're driving a big rig, meaning truck and trailer, give plenty of braking distance and watch for passes on the right. What I'm talking about is if as you move over to that center lane, because somebody's going to merge on your right, be aware that sometimes cars that'll following you are going to duck around and going to come up on your right side. So just keep your eyes open. As Rockin' Robbie Hodges reminds us, 65 feet of rolling death, eyes up and hands free as you listen to this. And we hope that this episode, we got a very special guest today. We hope that this episode will help the miles pass a little bit easier and help you relax just a little bit. And today we have a very, very special guest. You know, I was in a lot of conversations about J-Bar-J Rodeo, and of course, Night Jacket was inducted into the Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame this last year. And we got to look in, and certainly it tracks all back, as we know, back to Nightmare of the J-Bar-J Bronc. And I'm at a wedding in Hawaii in May for my nephew and his fiance, and I get a phone call. And I look, and on my caller ID, it says Hawaii. And I'm like, who in the world is calling me from Hawaii? And sure enough, it was Mr. Marty Martins. He'd heard I was looking for stories on Nightmare. Tim Sparks, I believe, or Marlon Harris had talked to him. And it was kind of cool to be standing on the island in Hawaii and receive a phone call from Hawaii. And I'd like to introduce him to our show today. Please welcome Mr. Marty Martins. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Doug. It's great to be here.
It is.
And appreciate everything you're doing for the sport with your show.
Well, and I appreciate that, and thank you for that. And it takes a lot to move this show on. A lot of folks, and you've been an invaluable asset to us, a resource to us, as we have gotten super interested. You and I have had several conversations about Longhorn Rodeo as we put this docu-podcast, that's what I'm going to call it, docu-podcast together. And as you've been so helpful, Marty, it's so important to realize just how intertwined everything was between the IPRA and Bruce Lurkey and Longhorn, and of course the trip to South Africa, all the things you and I have talked about, and the business of it, which you have been super helpful with. So again, welcome to the show, and I want to cover some of those things that we've talked about on our conversations about Longhorn, but let's go way back to the beginning, if we could. Go back growing up, Marty Martins in Wisconsin.
Okay, well, I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in the city of Milwaukee. My dad was a Milwaukee police officer, so it was the requirements back then. I don't know if it still is. The police had to live in the city of Milwaukee, so we lived in Milwaukee. And we were one block short of the first western suburb, but that was fine. It was a great life. And when I was 12 years old, I went out to a livery stable with one of my cousins out in I guess you'd call it the suburbs, and actually it was more rural, and to rent a horse on a Sunday afternoon. You know, I think it was $2 for an hour or something like that. And I really liked it, and so I started doing that as often as I could, scrape for the money and go get a ride out there. And then so then I was 12 years old then, and that's just sort of sparked my interest in horses. And so about the age when all my buddies were hanging out at filling stations and learning how to build go-karts, I was hanging out at the livery stable learning about horses. And I was hanging out at this one livery stable, and you got to be all, friends with all these people and all the other kids who hung out there. Some of them had horses, some of them didn't, and I was one of the escorts on the trail rides. Finally, when the boss knew you knew enough about horses and could trust you with taking out his paying customers. So I was a guide on these trail rides down into the park, and we go out riding for an hour and give them all a little canter and things like that. It was a lot of fun. Got me in the saddle for free, so that was good. But every year, Labor Day weekend, there was a rodeo out in Mugwanago, Wisconsin, on Bruce Larkey's farm. As well as mother's farm, I guess. And Bruce had built this permanent arena there. And it was a really nice arena with built-in bleachers on one side. And so anyway, we all young kids, boys and girls, would go out there, and we were all high school age, and go to the rodeo and make a night of it. So one year we were at the rodeo, and I said, I've got to do that. And my first rodeo was Memorial Day weekend, 1965. It was the day after I graduated from high school. And competed in my first rodeo. Of course, I got bucked off, but Bar-M, Mito Calzavera, Bar-M Rodeo Company had the stock. But Doug, I'm telling you, it was like somebody mainlined cocaine into my arteries. I was hooked. I became an adrenaline junkie after that. I just had to wait for the next one. So here's a funny story with Bruce Larkey. So I had joined the association so I could compete in the rodeo. I knew they had local entries, but I didn't want any of that. I wanted to join the IRA. So I'm at the rodeo, and Bruce Larkey's walking by, and I said, "Do you know someone I can borrow a rigging from?" And he said, "You're competing?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, are you a local entry?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm an IRA member." He said, "Like, you're an IRA member?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." "Well, let me see your card." So I opened up my wallet and showed him my IRA card, which, by the way, my IRA number is 4655. And so he kind of went on his way. I competed in 2 more rodeos that summer. And so that was my first year rodeo, 3 rodeos. And so the next summer I went to 7 rodeos. And I forget who it was. I think maybe it was Chuck Smith, but he said, "You got to go to rodeo school." And I think that made sense. So Mel Autry had this rodeo school down in Rush Springs, Oklahoma. So I went down there one spring and spent a week down there at his place. He had a regular bunkhouse. Another cowboy from Chicago area was also going down, so I was able to catch a ride with him. And so it was a good experience. I learned a lot. And one thing I learned from Mel was how to mark horses out. I seldom missed out a horse after that. And I'm telling you, the ones I missed out, I always question, did I really miss it out or not? But Mel had this system where you didn't sit on the horse's back. You kept your feet on the slats of the chute gate, and you had your hand in the rigging, and you were just right above the horse's back. And when you nodded, as soon as the gate started to move away from your foot, because now you wouldn't have a gate to put your foot on anymore, you jumped forward. I shouldn't say you jumped, but you drove your feet forward and caught the horse as he was turning. Mm-hmm. And so the horse was basically turning into your foot on one side. And so it really helped me a lot. I just, what it's like when you mark one out. You just, you're tapped off. You started going to more rodeos after that. So that was like my third year. Then I think I ran into Tom Moore's dad at a quarter horse sale in Madison, Wisconsin one time, and got to talking with him, and he said something like, oh, you got to call Tom. So I called Tom, and he said, well, you want to go roading with me? I said, well, for sure. Here was this top 15 bronc rider. We didn't have a finals yet, but in the IRA magazine, Rodeo News magazine, they listed the top 15 contestants in every event. So he was a top 15 bronc rider, and I said, well, hell yeah, I'm going to travel with a top 15 bronc rider. So Tom lived down in Byron, Illinois. It's about 110 miles from Milwaukee, and so every weekend I'd hitchhike down there and meet with him, and we'd go to a rodeo. Usually, if we get to one Friday night, we'd make it. Otherwise, we'd go to one on Saturday, one on Sunday afternoon, come back. And then Sunday night, I'd hitchhike back up to Milwaukee. And so
let me ask you a question here, Marty.
Yeah.
When you say hitchhiked, you mean you caught a ride with a friend? Arranged your ride?
I stood on the side of the road with my thumb out and my war bag next to my foot. Yeah.
Hitchhike.
So it was
1967, right? 1968.
No, this was 6. Well, yeah, this was 67. Yeah.
And you literally stick your thumb out. You got your rigging bag with you.
Yep.
And you waited for a ride. Another question for you, Juan. You started riding broncs in 1965, got busy in 66, bareback horses. So the rigging you were using at the time, soft-handled rigging, hard-handled rigging?
Well, it was a rawhide rigging. It was, nothing like they have nowadays, but it was a pretty solid handhold. Wayne Hansen, champion bareback rider, built it for me, and he was making them at the time and made it and used it for a long time. So here's a funny story about rigging, though. In the fall, in November, the last rodeo of the season was at Longhorn Rodeo. It was a Loretta Lynn rodeo in the Detroit State Fair Coliseum. So I was there competing with my brand new rigging, and I go out there. I mean, of course, I'd already had it on several horses, and going out, all of a sudden, I get a bunch of slack in my rigging, and what? And I'm feeling squeezing my grip even harder. I thought, no, I still got my rig in my hand. I've got all this play in my rigging. And the next jump, I go out the back end, the rigging's still in my hand.
Oh, wow.
And what had happened was one of the welds, my cinch broke.
Oh, wow.
And so it broke. And so the first jump after the break, half the strings on the cinch came off the end of the ring, and the next jump, all the rest of them came off.
Yeah.
So everyone back at the chutes got a big laugh about that. Here comes Marty with his hand still in the ring and his broken cinch hanging down there.
So what year would that have been? Detroit in the State Fair Coliseum.
Yeah, that probably was 67 or I might imagine 67 or 68.
Okay.
Yeah.
And before you move on, tell us a little bit. We've heard Mito Calcevera's name a lot. We know that he was one of the gentlemen sitting at the table at the beginning of the conversation with the Interstate Rodeo Association back then when the IRA was looking to form up. Tell us a little bit about Mito Calcevera.
Well, he was quite a character, kind of a Wily West son of a gun. He always walked around with a cattle prod under his arm, and he would flank the horses. And about the time they turned out of the chute, he'd give them a shot with a hot shot at the same time.
Right.
Same thing with the bulls. And so I remember maybe you'll hear stories of one time about Billy Don Haynes. And so one time Mito was yelling at Billy Don. He was taking too long. Billy Don was a bronc rider, and he said, Billy Don, you wild west son of a bitch, hurry up and get out of my horse, something like that. Yeah. And Billy Don turns around and looks at Mito. Wild West? He said, that's the pot calling the kettle black. Speaking of Mito.
Yeah.
But another time at another rodeo, Mito had the shock prod under his arm, and he was tying off the flank on the bull, and he shot by accident, shot Tom Orr in the butt. And Tom lets out a shriek, and you know what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And then when we realized what had happened, things calmed down. But and Mito apologized. Mito had two brothers, Rudy and Oscar. So Mito had the sock, and the brothers were to pick him in, and they had the sock for all the Larky Chapman rodeos back in the day.
Okay.
So,
okay. And we're going to get into Larky and Chapman here in just a moment. So you've graduated from high school, 1967, 1968, middle of the Vietnam War. So,
yep, so I graduated in 65, and that fall I started at the University of Wisconsin.
Okay.
So I had a 2S deferment. I didn't have to go in right away.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I don't even know if the draft was going on yet.
Okay.
So, but we were all aware that there was a war going on. So I was up in Wisconsin. I was aware of the National Intercollegiate Rodeo Association.
Okay.
And I said, well, heck, let's rodeo in college.
Yeah.
There was a club on campus. I was an animal science major, and the club was the Saddle and Sirloin Club, and they sponsored this big horse show there every year. And of course, you've maybe heard of the International Horse Show in Chicago, and that's where the IRA started, the Interstate Road Association at the International Amphitheater. Well, the Wisconsin, the Saddle and Sirloin Club called their horse show the Little International. So anyway, but they were the egg club on campus. So I went to them with two of the other cowboys that wanted to rodeo in college, and asked them to sponsor our rodeo team. So they came up with the money, and we got Ralston Farina to donate vests. So we had our Ralston Farina checkerboard vests with the UW rodeo teams embroidered on the back. Mm-hmm. And then it was a summer 69. Summer 69. Mm-hmm. Joe Lifto, who grew up in the Chicago area, he was been in California for a number of years already, but he was back home for the summer. And because back then, even to this day, you could rodeo college and professional at the same time. And so he found out that I was on the rodeo team at Wisconsin. He said, well, why don't you come out and be on my rodeo team? He was the captain of the Cal Poly rodeo team.
Oh, wow.
And he said, I'll get you a scholarship. I enrolled at Cal Poly. I was already enrolled to go back to Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. Well, the winter before that was just a brutal, brutal winter in Wisconsin. I'm going to digress here off the rodeo circuit. I was coming home. I was working nights at Oscar Mayer packing plant in Madison, Wisconsin, and living with a buddy out on a farm outside Madison. And I was going around a curve one night, going slow, but it had black ice, and my pickup truck just slid sideways. It just lost all momentum. It just slid sideways, straight across from one side of the road to the other side. I had to walk back to a truck stop and call him. He said, well, I'm not coming out now. He said, I'll come get you in the mornings. Yeah. And the fall of 69 was coming up. A cold front came through, and I said, that's it. I said, I'm not going through another winter like that. I threw all my stuff in my pickup truck, and like I said, I was already registered to go back to Wisconsin or to Cal Poly, and I went out to Cal Poly.
Okay. What did the National Intercollegiate Rodeo competition look like in that time? Were there a lot of organized?
Yeah, I think at that time there was at least 100 schools, 100 colleges had intercollegiate rodeo teams, and I think before I finished it was like up to about 150. I don't know what it is today. And one of the things about that helped me in school, though, because contrary to NCAA, where you only need a D average to play college football, you had to have a C average. C average grades to compete in college rodeo.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And so I had flunked organic chemistry the first time. It was a requirement for animal science.
Yeah.
And so I went to my advisor and I said, okay, listen, I'm on the college rodeo team and I need to maintain a C average. So I need to pass this course.
Yeah.
And so he told me different hints, things to do, and blah, blah, blah. So I passed, and he kept up my C average. So anyway, then I went out to Cal Poly that fall and rodeoed out there for 3 years. So I finished my animal science degree, and I still had 2 years of eligibility left. And I was doing so well in college rodeo, and it was so much fun. I said, well, hell, what am I going to do now? So I went ahead and stayed there in college and picked up a minor in journalism. So, and right now I have to give a plug for my rodeo team coach out in Cal Poly.
You bet.
Dr. Doug Butler. I don't know if you know any horseshoers are listening to the show or anything like that.
Sure.
But Doug Butler wrote the book. He wrote the book. I think it's called The Art of Horseshoeing or something like that. But it is the Bible of horseshoeing. And he wrote that book. And there's been people try to mimic it since then, but none have come close. And so Joe Lifto, he said, okay, well, first thing you want to do is get enrolled in Doug Butler's horseshoeing class, because that was one of the classes offered at Cal Poly. That's a ag college. Why not? Of course they're at the horseshoeing. So, and now in Cal Poly, there's two campuses, the San Luis Obispo one for up north, and then the Pomona campus in the south. And the campus was donated by Kellogg, from Kellogg's Rice Krispies guy.
Oh, yeah.
So this guy had raised Arabians there for years, Mr. Kellogg. And he said, okay, I'm going to donate all this land to you for a college. So every Sunday he used to put on a horse show with these Arabs. And he said, I'll give you all the land, but you have to keep having the Sunday horse show. And of course, Cal Poly said, well, hell yeah. So they got the ranch, they got the Arab horses, and they kept doing the horse show. So, of course, I took horseshoeing from Doug, and he helped me make a little money while I was going through college,
So you actually started shoeing horses for other people?
Yes.
Oh, nice. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, me and my college roommate was an Indian fella from, I can't remember the name of his reservation, the Rincon Reservation, Ed Mazzetti. His dad was actually tribal chairman for a while, and he was a steer wrestler on our rodeo team. Okay, so, back to Doug Butler. So Doug, we'd come back from the rodeos every week, and we were not part of the athletics department because we were under the agricultural department. But so we had to get permission or whatever, get the blessing of the athletics department to get varsity letters, so we could have our varsity letters on our jackets and stuff. And so every week when we came back from a college rodeo, because we were in the Western Circuit, and we had 6 to 10 college rodeos a season, and I would write up an article for the school newspaper about the rodeo team, so people would know we even had a rodeo team on campus. And because the athletics department damn sure wasn't going to do it for us. And Dr. Butler said, he said, Marty, you really have a talent for writing. And he said, you owe it to yourself to develop that. And that was part of the impetus for me going into journalism after that, taking those journalism courses.
Wow.
And so as far as my writing career, I'll give him all the credit right from the start.
You bet.
Okay, so let's go back to Wisconsin now. So this is before I went to Cal Poly.
Okay.
I'm back in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And Chuck Smith was the chief field representative. And one of the things that the IRA did, which was revolutionary at the time, was putting on these judging clinics, training judges. And Tom Stovall, I'm sure you've probably heard of him before, but Tom Stovall put together this judging handbook. And Tom was not only was a prolific writer, but he was also a very good artist. So he illustrated a lot of the artwork in the judging handbook. And so they had taken photographs of the judging handbook and made slides on it. So Chuck would put the slideshow on while he was lecturing, so he could put up Tom's photos or drawings on the wall for us to see. In order to become a judge, once I started the judging clinic, in order to judge a rodeo, you had to be on the official judges list. And to do that, you had to go to a judging clinic. So I just wanted to learn about my sport. I had no intentions of being a judge, heaven forbid. So I went to the judging clinic. I was on the official list. And so then did that a couple years up in Wisconsin, and then the finals started. So then we had a convention. Even before the finals started, we had a convention. Every year at the convention, they put on a judging clinic also. There was a lot of people there, and it was a good place to put it. So after that, I started going to the judging clinic at the convention. And so I remember one year a couple years it was in Memphis, and another year it was in Little Rock. But before we ended up having the finals in Tulsa.
What were these conventions, Marty? No finals, but it was what, in January? These conventions?
Yeah, it was in January. Yeah. Well, it was a big deal because that was where all the champions would be announced. Everyone knew who won, who had the most money, just by reading Rodeo News, who was in first place. Everyone got to dress up and wear their fancy clothes, and the champions all got their saddles and their buckles. And Miss Rodeo USA competition would be held there at the convention. And then she would be named at the convention also. And so it was just a good time, a lot of camaraderie. And another thing about the IRA, which was unique, was they started this board of governors. The Interstate Rodeo Association started in 63, and then I think it went into hiatus for a couple of years. So we had 63 champions, and then it came back in 65 as the International Rodeo Association. And so it was the Interstate Rodeo Association, now it was the International Rodeo Association. But it had a new bylaws, and one of the things was we had this board of governors. So we had a board of directors, so all the different events were on the board of directors. The IRA was also unique in the fact that we accepted women into our club. We didn't make them have a separate association. Mm-hmm. Cowgirls Barrel Racing was a recognized event in our association. But then we had this board of governors. Now, the board of governors had two committeemen members, 2 stock contractor members, and I think 3 or 4 competitor members they were people who were on the board, were directors from the board of directors. Some of them sat on the board of governors. And the IRA also had a fan governor, and so the fan governor was on the board of governors also. So they're the ones who really had the power. The board of directors, they could make the rules for the events, for their events. But as far as governing the association, it was the board of governors. At the convention, the board of governors would be there. So we had the committee. So they had committee meetings for the committeemen. They had meetings for stock contractors. They had a clinic for the rodeo secretaries and timers. So you had to go to a clinic to be an official timer, things like that. So anyway, so that's what happened at the convention. So it was always a fun event. Though. It was just like one of those things in the middle of the rodeo when there was no rodeos going on, and everyone got to go together and have a good time and see everybody that you weren't going to see again until the spring.
Okay.
And
couple days. So, what was it?
Yeah. It was usually over a weekend. I forget. I think it was like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday type of thing, if I remember right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what it ended with the ball. There's always a ball on Saturday night. That's where they had pass out the saddles and the buckles, and they had dancing and things like that. And so, a lot of fun. So now I'm back out in California and rodeoing, and so I was starting to write stories from the different IRA rodeos that I went to, and submitting those to Chuck Smith, because Chuck Smith would come out to the West Coast to different rodeos. Lakeside was the biggest rodeo, and so Chuck would almost always be there. And I think even before that, he had enlisted me, maybe at one of the clinics in Wisconsin or maybe at the convention. But he wanted me to write for Rodeo News Magazine, and he said, "I'll give you a penny a word."
Oh wow!
So I would write these stories, and I never padded them with extra bullshit or anything, stuff like that. But and so then I would count up my words, and then I would say so many words times 1 cent. They would send me a check for my $10 or whatever it was. So, but it was nice to get paid for your writing, and doing that same thing out on the West Coast, writing little articles on the things and human interest stories too. They're just not about the rodeo. There was a rodeo photographer out there named Sandy Wares. He was the photographer at IFR 1 and IFR 2, and he was a Navy veteran, and he loved photography and loved going to rodeos because he'd take photos at the lakes, all the California rodeos. And so they had selections. Now people voted on the board of directors who are we going to let take our photos for the finals. So they voted Sandy Wares. Okay, they offered him the contract, and so he came back there the first 2 years and took the photos. But anyway, Sandy had cowboy boots that he had golf cleats. He'd gone to a cobbler and had golf cleats put into the soles of his cowboy boots, so he could have traction when he was in the rodeo arena taking photos. I remember doing a story of it because I had to use Sandy's camera to take a photo of him sitting in the bumper of his Cadillac, putting on his rodeo boots. I told you about that judging clinic. Well, one year, I don't know what year it was, so sorry, I went out there in 69, so this was probably early 70s. And Ben Bruton, who was the producer for all the rodeos out there. So we had one stock contractor, which was Lloyd Hawkins. And then Lloyd Hawkins had a partner for a while. And then Ben Bruton was the producer. And so he called me one time. He says, "Well, we've got this rodeo coming up at Los Alamitos." Now, Los Alamitos was a quarter horse track in Southern California. So, you don't see too many racetracks that are just a straight line. It was a big deal back then. And so I said, "Yeah, I know we do, Ben. I'm going to be there." He said, yeah, but you're going to judge it.
Oh,
I said,
wow.
what?
Wow.
I said, no, I'd never judged a rodeo in my life. I said, that ain't happening. He said, well, Marty, here's the story. They had passed a rule that you could only judge 2 rodeos in a row, and then you had to switch judges. So you couldn't have the same 2 guys at 3 rodeos in a row. So you could switch them up. You could, if you had 3 judges, you could rotate them around or something like that, but you couldn't have the same guy 2 weeks in a row. So he said, because no one had a clinic out there yet, and we didn't have enough judges, he said, your numbers come up. We only have so many judges, and so if you don't agree to judge this rodeo, we're not having the rodeo. I said, oh shit! I said, okay, all right, I'll come judge it. Yeah. So I mean, I was on the approval list. I guess I should own up to being able to do it. So I went out there, and I'm telling you, one of the hardest parts of being a rodeo judge is measuring the damn barrier for the timed events.
Is that right?
That takes some mathematics and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, because you have to measure the arena, and then you have to measure the distance from the fences where put your barrels, and then so
the math. The math caught you, Marty. The math.
Yeah, yeah. That was never my forte.
Yeah.
So, but remember, I told you about Ralston Farina sponsoring our vests for the rodeo team at Wisconsin.
Yes,
well,
yes.
Ralston Farina also was sponsoring the judges' vest for the IRA. So here I was in my checkered vest, and it had a little patch on the, or you would have a badge, if you were a cop or something. It had a little badge that said official judge or something. And I can picture him in my mind, but I can't remember who the other judge was.
Yeah.
But another thing that was really tricky about judging, team roping was not a big thing back in Oklahoma yet. It's big all over now. But back then, there wasn't a lot of team roping in Oklahoma. But there damn sure was team roping in California.
There was.
And you'd go, oh, yeah. They had team ropings jackpot team ropings during the week. Okay. You could go to a team roping just about every night of the week to a jackpot someplace, and they'd have 100 teams. And so it wasn't any different at the rodeo. You'd go to rodeo, and there'd be like 100 teams.
Yeah.
And you'd have slack going way late into the night, into the next morning sometimes for all the extra team ropers. So luckily that didn't happen at Los Alamitos. But anyway, I had the flag the team roping, which is another trick on all itself, because there's so many different little, the way the loops can go around. You get a loop around the horns, you can get a loop around the neck, but you can't get a figure 8 around the horns. Before you could drop the flag, you had to quickly check all this stuff, make sure the guy's got two hind legs on the loop or one. And of course, the ropers are all waiting for the damn flag to drop. They don't want you wasting any time. So, but as long as you're consistent with all the teams, it all works out in the end. But I got through it. It was okay. But
well, and this was an IRA rodeo, Marty, in California.
Yeah, IRA. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is something I don't know that a lot of our listeners know, that there were a lot of IRA rodeos in California and across the West at that point.
Oh, I would say at least 6 to 10 a year, a season.
Okay.
Yeah, there was always Lakeside, which is a big permanent arena there. I mean, there was a number of them out in the high desert. I remember one year I think it was at Yermo in the high desert, and a sandstorm came up. And so here we're having this rodeo. I didn't even see how many fans stayed in the grandstand to watch this thing. But you would nod your head for your bareback horse, and as soon as that horse turned his head and got past the gate, the sand would hit him in the eyes.
Oh, wow.
And of course now they're blind.
Oh, wow.
And they're either rearing over backwards or falling over sideways. It was pretty scary, but yeah, those sandstorms could come up on the desert. Hesperia, I can't think of all the rodeos up there in the high desert. There was a number of them. Yermo, I can't think of any right now off the top of my head. But.
And when you were in college, you judged this as a college student. You were a judge, and you said you also.
I wasn't. Yeah, I was a college student, but I was there. I was judging as a professional. Rodeo.
Yeah. For the IRA.
Yeah.
And
right.
And you said that you were competing professional rodeo as well as the Intercollegiate Rodeo Association. Were you riding primarily IRA, and were you riding primarily in the West?
Yeah, I was totally solid IRA. I only competed in the IRA, and then of course in IRA, which I was allowed to do. Okay. And now remember, I told you my dad was a cop, and so another thing that the IRA had was spokesmen. We had spokesmen for different areas of the country. Mm-hmm. So I was the spokesman for Wisconsin. And I think Fred Thimling was another one up there in Wisconsin. And we were supposed to solve problems. If problems came up or something like that, we were supposed to help solve problems and whatever. So I kept my spokesman's status, I guess, when I went to California. But one of the things I did as a spokesman was I'd go to RCA rodeos. And if I found an IRA cowboy sneaking off competing as a local entry or something in the RCA rodeo, I would turn him in.
Oh, wow. Okay. That was a responsibility, right?
That was one of them. Yeah, that was, call me a stoolie, call me a squealer, whatever. You're going to belong to a club, you obey the rules.
Okay.
So same thing with professional rodeo. You want to sneak off. And I remember there was a indoor rodeo at the Dane County Coliseum in Madison, Wisconsin, and Bob Barnes had the stock, RCA rodeo, and two cowboys I was friends with were from Iowa, where they're competing in the bronc riding, and they saw me, and they came up and said, "Well, I suppose you're going to turn us in." I said, "I am, fellas."
Wow.
They just shook their head, not acknowledging. Yeah. Okay. It's what he caught us.
Yeah. I don't want to pass by this. 1972, you make the finals Intercollegiate Rodeo Association in the bareback riding. Talk a little bit about that. Where was that held that year? Who'd you come across? Any other cowboys?
It wasn't 73. They might have been 72.
72. I'm sorry. Yeah, 1972.
Okay, so it was in Bozeman, Montana. It was there at the Montana State University field house for several years, and I think of his name, the guy who was the first head of the NFR in Vegas.
Oh, Sean Davis.
Sean Davis. Mm-hmm. Sean Davis was one of the founders of the National Intercollegiate Rodeo Association when he was in college.
Did not
and in
know
fact, he judged one of the rodeos. I think the college rodeo at Fresno. He judged that rodeo when I was there. But
that's cool.
So,
I didn't know that about Sean, and I met him, a few years ago when we were out in Pocatello, Idaho. What a great gentleman, and he's big in. You talked about horse racing before, the quarter horse racetrack. He was big in horse racing as well. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. So Bozeman, Montana, first year. Sean Davis is judging. Tell us.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't judging. He wasn't judging Bozeman. I'm just telling you. He started the NRA. He and a couple other guys. But so I forget who was judging. But they were definitely RCA guys judging.
Okay.
And I didn't try to cover up my IRA belt emblem on my belt, but I don't know that had anything to do with it. It was a 2-head in each event, so that was fun. And my girlfriend, future wife, was there, so that made it special for me. And our rodeo team advisor took us up there in a state car. So that was,
that's a pretty big run, isn't it? Quite a lot of traveling.
Yeah, it was. We kind of went up through 15 North, up through straight through Salt Lake City and up there, and then kind of a straight shot into Bozeman.
Yeah.
It was beautiful, beautiful country. Then I've only was there twice, but it was beautiful country and a fun time at the finals. So then I graduated from college and had a job waiting for me at Rodeo News Magazine. So I went back there, and Chuck decided he couldn't afford me solely working for Rodeo News. So I was working half-time for Rodeo News and half-time for the IRA. So I was IRA publicity director and managing editor of Rodeo News Magazine.
Oh, wow.
So,
And how did I know you were writing stuff for Chuck Smith. And I got to ask, you graduate with a bachelor's degree in animal science. Where were you headed? Were you headed to a ranch? Were you headed to vet school? What were you thinking with the animal science degree?
My goal starting out was the vet school. But then after flunking organic chemistry the first time, I realized I wasn't going to get into vet school.
Yeah.
I just didn't have the aptitude for the science part of it. And so I ended up getting my degree in fact, my advisor in Wisconsin, he said, "Well, Marty, chances are you're not going to get into vet school." He says, "So I think you need it," because they had a program called pre-vet. I was actually pre-vet. He said, "Why don't you name a major now, so at least you can get a degree in something?" I said, "Okay, Doc." I said, I'll go for animal science. So, in fact, at Wisconsin, the degree is called meat in animal science. So, but at Cal Poly, it's called just animal science. So that's my degree is animal science.
And with a minor in journalism, so you're really at this point starting to lean into your minor, journalism.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, that's what I was doing.
So what were your duties for the IPRA or the IRA at that point, publicity director? What kind of things were you doing? This is a full-time job, yes?
Yeah, well, Chuck was the chief field representative, so that meant he had to be on the road a lot of the time. So basically, I was like helping run the office. There was an office manager, Pat Jordan. She was like, Chuck's right-hand gal, and just knew how everything ran. And then she eventually left, and Diane Beeson was office manager. I think Diane was already working there as one of the secretaries, and she moved up and became office manager. But yeah, people don't realize, and people would stop by the IRA offices. I mean, we were in the penthouse in the tallest building in Pauls Valley. This wasn't like some flunky organization operating out of somebody's trunk.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a full suite of offices. Across the hall, we had a great big conference room. And so when I say penthouse, we're talking the fourth floor, but it was still the tallest building in Pauls Valley at that time.
Yeah.
So I'd help run the office and handle calls. Cowboys would call in, irate about this or that, all that stuff beyond the office manager's duties. And I would help quell some of that stuff till Chuck got back. And then, but as publicity director, I would do press releases on stuff. The bigger rodeos, I do press releases and get them sent out. And every year I would update the IRA publicity package that was available to all IRA rodeos that wanted it could pay for this publicity package to use to promote their rodeos. It had press releases on each event, explaining each event. I had glossy photos, a whole packet of different photos of different events and things like that were all ready to go that they could give the newspapers and whatever, print media. And then it had some tapes in it. Didn't have any stuff for TV yet, but we had audio tapes that were in there for didn't have any podcasts back then, Doug.
No. But radio spots, right? Radio advertising spots.
For radio spots. So we had professionally prepared radio spots on these little spools of tape, that you would give to radio stations.
And then is this where your paths kind of started to merge with Bruce Lorkey again? Because he's pretty engaged with the IRA at that point. He's on the board of governors.
He's one of the owners of Rodeo News magazine.
Mm-hmm.
He and Chuck, I think, were partners in Rodeo News magazine. That was a big deal, too, because I was there when we switched from used to be a duotone cover, and then we went to a full-color cover, and then we went to a full-color glossy cover. So it was a high-class magazine. It was probably the best marketing tool the IRA had was that magazine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was usually 48 pages every issue, except the championship issue. It was a combined issue, and December, January was like usually 72 pages or more.
Oh, wow.
And that didn't count the Longhorn advertising supplement that went in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was a pretty good-sized magazine. And that was 2 weeks a month. And then the other 2 weeks I was over at the Rodeo News, which is a building on Chuck's property in Pauls Valley, a separate building where we did all the layout work and things like that, and then did the camera work. We had a printer out in Oklahoma City, and Chuck, well, this is just costing too much, just running back and forth and everything. So he bought a printing press and hired a printer away from the printer in Oklahoma City, and which the guy lived in Pauls Valley, so it just was perfect for him. And he said, "You get me a health insurance plan, and I'm yours." And so Chuck went and started a health insurance plan for all of us. That Rodeo News fell under that umbrella, so that was good. And it was really neat to work in a printing plant, and you could smell of the printer's ink and hear the press running and things like that.
And you're writing articles still. Are you traveling about to watch rodeos to write these articles? How are you? How are you?
Not so much.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd still compete in nearby rodeos. I'd still run off and compete. I would go to nearby rodeos and just to cover them. And even if I wasn't competing, like I remember one time we went out to Smithville, Oklahoma. Smithville's in the Kiamichi Mountains, where Doug Williams lived and Ben Jordan. But one thing I learned back then was every year, 1/10 of the fawn crop is lost to ticks.
Really?
We were up there, and we got back in the camper, and my wife was found ticks on our dog, and so she's picking them off. And then she said, "Let me check you." And damn sure if I didn't have ticks on me too.
Oh, wow.
So, but yeah, I guess back there they're used to it. But so that was about as far as I went, I think, from home for rodeo news. I went to other ones close. I can't even think the names of the other ones nearby. Ada, Oklahoma. Ada used to be a IRA rodeo, but then Ken Lance, he switched over to RCA.
Okay.
We lost that one.
So were you? I know eventually you became the managing editor of the national sports magazine, the Rodeo News.
Yep.
Yeah. So you had full responsibility, whether it's 42 pages or 78 pages, whatever. You're laying out. You're getting stories. Did you have writers for you that were writing articles or would submit to you?
Yes. Well, okay. Let's go. Let me go back, and I want to say something about the era. Because everyone's familiar with the PBR, Professional Bull Riders, right?
Yep.
Well, back then, back in the 70s, there used to be the 100-head bull riding at Ardmore, Oklahoma. No one had ever thought of just having bull riding. And the Ardmore JCs, every year they would put on this bull riding, 100-head bull riders. And it was a big thing. All the bull riders loved it. Every year they'd come to this big bull riding. And I'm sure that's where someone got the idea to start, bull riding only. But I had that for a number of years. So where did I leave off? So I was going to rodeos nearby to cover rodeo news. I wasn't writing so much. Tom Sobol did the first 3 IFR programs, but then one of my additional duties, not as editor of rodeo news, but part-time job, was putting together the IFR program. So Chuck paid me separately for that. So, which is always a kind of a chore because you had to do biographies on 105 contestants.
Wow.
And so some guys competed in more than one event. Well, you couldn't just cut and paste the same article. No, you had to, like Dan Daly. Dan Daly got 3 or 4 different bios just written separately. Now, granted, some of the stuff was the same information, but it had to be something different for each one. So, and then we had to submit a head and shoulder shot every year. So we always had to track down the latecomers who didn't get their photo in. Right. So putting that together. As editor of Rodeo News, I did all the layout. So here I'm at Rodeo News working for Chuck, and my wife had a degree in animal science, and she was working for a vet, and she wanted something more in agricultural. She had a chance to use her degree before we started having kids. Mm-hmm. So one year we went on vacation up to the Black Hills, and just because we wanted to see it. And we were both into the Indian culture. We had a teepee. So we went up there for a vacation, and then my wife decided, well, let me give you a chance to go up and get a job up there and use my degree before we start having kids. So I said, okay. So I told Chuck, adios. I said, I'm leaving. I'm going to South Dakota. And so we moved to South Dakota. And we barely got to South Dakota, and she already had a job.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever heard of Bear Country USA.
No.
It's a drive-through animal park. So you pay your fee when you came in, and you would drive through all these different sections. They were all fenced off, and there was bears, and there was the wolf section, and the antelope section, and I don't think we had any buffalo, but all these different animal things in the different sections. So I learned a lot about bears while we lived there. Oh, and she got our housing as part of the deal of living there at the park. She was the manager and caretaker for all the small animals. So she had the skunks and the raccoons and the possums, and there was always a fawn there because very often the highway patrol had a deal when if a deer got killed, a mother deer and the fawn was left, they would call us, and we would come out. We would take the dead deer off the road because we could feed it to the bears, and then we would take the fawn and put it on display.
Where is Bear Country USA generally within South Dakota?
If you went through Rapid City and then started up the highway going towards Mount Rushmore, you would go right by it on your right, going uphill. You can't hardly miss it. There's so many signs.
Okay.
Yeah, still there as far as I know. I don't know. Last time I looked online, it was still there. But anyway, we were there till the fall. So they were going to shut down in the fall. They were closing down for the winter. And so what are we going to do now? And so we started looking for jobs. And lo and behold, we found someone was looking for a ranch manager at this cattle ranch. Well, bingo, here we are, a husband and wife team, both degrees with animal science. So we applied for this job, and we got this job managing this cattle ranch, cow-calf operation further up in the Black Hills. And so that was another adventure. We're getting pretty far afield.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, so you're in North Country there. You're back into the weather you grew up with in Wisconsin.
Yes, it was. the man who lived on this farm, it was a ranch his whole life. He sold it. When he retired, he sold it. He kept 1 acre, not even a mile up the road from where we were, where the main farmhouse was. He kept 1 acre, and he and his wife, that was their retirement home there. One of the deals when we got this contract to run this place, we told him, I said, okay, well, here's our deal. We'll stay here, we'll manage the place, but it has to include a milk cow. And we wanted our milk. So you negotiate things.
Yeah.
We already had a chicken coop, so we knew we were going to get eggs.
Yeah.
So we want a milk cow.
Yeah.
And so we got a milk cow.
Yeah.
And so my poor wife, she would go down and milk that cow twice a day. And she'd come in some days in the wintertime and she'd be crying because her hands hurt so much. Because she was she's holding a warm tit, squeezing with her grip, but the outside of her hand has no protection, and it's below 0 weather, even inside the barn. Yeah. And so part of the deal was the owner said he was a insurance broker or salesman down in Rapid City, and they had bought this place. And they said, well, all right, we'll get you the milk cow, and you keep all the milk you can use. Mm-hmm. You can sell milk to Leo and his wife. Leo Kindler and his wife, they lived just up the road, the previous owners. Okay. And then everything else you put in the refrigerator in the house for us. So we provided all these big jars. So everything we didn't use, we kept put in the refrigerator down in their big farmhouse. It's two-story farmhouse. And we lived on a hill up above the farmhouse in this old travel trailer. Now, we're not talking about any fancy double wide. Right. We're talking the old-fashioned single wide travel trailer. Yeah. And, I mean, it was so cold. Anyway, it was so cold up there. Leo, who had lived on this ranch his entire life, he said, Marty, he said, I lived here my entire life. He said, this is one of the 2 worst winters I've ever experienced. Oh, my. It was cold. Yeah. But anyway, so we were in this travel trailer, and our bedroom was on one end. And the wind was blowing so bad, it was forcing the snow between the cracks around the window frame. God. I don't know, we could have sealed it any better. Yeah. But we'd wake up, and the house was so cold, and there would be snowflakes on our pillow. That got forced. Yeah, it was cold. But
did your water freeze? In the trailer, did the water freeze?
It froze more than once, I know that. But I'm trying to think how we... Sometimes we had to go down to the well and run the well to get the water. Okay. But it was always nice, icy, cold water. Yeah. And then the other thing in the wintertime was the toilet would freeze up. Yeah. So then we had, but luckily back from the old days, there was a nice 2-hole commode there on the place.
An outhouse.
Yeah, an outhouse. Yeah, it was a well-built outhouse. So that's where we would go.
So, when did the cows start having calves? Early spring?
We wish. The winter there lasts a long time. Yeah. Well, here's the deal. This was a Galloway cattle, so purebred Galloway cattle. I don't know if you know, they're like a shaggy Angus. Yeah. They're Scottish breed. They look like a shaggy Angus. Well, this owner, why, I don't know why, but he wanted to have a bigger land or whatever. So he wanted to get this grazing permit from the National Forest. So we backed up against the National Forest, and Black Hills National Forest. And so he wanted this grazing permit, and the guy who had the permit said, okay, he said, I'll sell you the permit. He said, but you've got to take all these cattle with it. Oh, wow. So, all right, so we picked up 123 head of grade cattle. Well, you know about herd immunity, right?
Right. Yeah. Talk a little bit about herd immunity.
When you've got a enclosed environment, they build up immunity. So these Galloway, they were fine till we started mixing them with these outside cattle who had diseases or whatever else that our cattle didn't have. So, but it wasn't so much that hurt the cattle. It was such a bad winter. We had used up all the hay in the barn, and we had to go down to the ag extension or whatever it was, and we're getting drought relief because there was a drought that previous year, so we didn't get all the hay that we wanted. And so we were getting these 80-pound sacks of barley to augment the hay. Now, I have to say this. My wife was a cowgirl son of a gun, but Chuck called me and said, Marty, I want you to come down and work the IFR program. Yeah. Because one thing on the IFR program, I knew this previous years before I was married, they had a scorecard. and that scorecard would be updated from one performance to the next. So if you came in as performance 4, you got to see the results of the previous four performances, right? Yep. So I mean, it was a job. So I had to get the scores and times for all the events after each performance, or run them to the printer and make sure those cards got printed overnight, so we'd have them back the next night to stuff in the programs.
Wow.
Well, so told my wife Chuck was offering me this money to come down there and work the IFR, blah, blah. She said, okay, go ahead and go. So here I left her taking care of this ranch by herself and toting these 80-pound bags of barley. She handled it like a champion. And here's another example of how bad this winter was. So we had this huge hay barn. It was, made out of logs, a 3-sided barn.
Yeah.
Down below the hay barn.
Yeah.
So we would get the hay out of the barn and could only throw the hay out on one side. So we threw it on the uphill side and then would scatter the hay out. And then we'd have to go down to the 3-sided barn where the cattle were holed up against the wind, and with switches and drive them up to the hay before the snow covered the hay up.
Oh my goodness.
Because I'm telling you, it was windy and blowing the hay, even though it wasn't snowing, it was blowing the snow that was already on the ground. So we had to drive them up there. Once they smelled the hay on the ground, then they would stay up there and eat the hay and the grain. But we had troughs for the grain, so that was good. Okay. But one of the things about that was we had 2 4-wheel drive pickups, which were basically stuck most of the winter because of the snow was so deep. So we had to haul out the barley sacks by hand and drag them along, stand in the feed trough and drag it along, dumping the barley out. So
hard way to do chores. Hard way to do chores. And keeping the water open and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, we had to break the ice every day for the milk cow to come out of her barn. But God bless my wife, she kept that thing going for 3 or 4 days while I was in Tulsa having a fun time.
Wow. But, so come spring, you got calves on the ground. Did you then go back? Did your wife go back then and work for bear country again, or how did that go?
Nope. Here's the rest of that story. So because the cattle were losing so much weight, there wasn't enough hay. Because of the drought, we didn't have enough hay.
Wow. And
so they were going off into the woods because he'd gotten this grazing permit for the National Forest. Yep. So they were going into the forest and eating the pine needles.
Oh.
Well, there's a thing called pine needle abortion.
Oh.
So we started losing calves. So a lot of these cattle were first-time heifers too. So we had then having to pull a lot of them and take them down to the house, and because there was heat in the house, and get the furnace going down there and try to warm up these calves and try to keep these calves alive.
Oh, my.
And very, very seldom did we keep one alive to make it to the winter.
Yeah.
They were just so skinny and thin from their skinny mothers.
No.
Yeah, it was pretty sad. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, anyway, my wife got pregnant while we were up there. So we put in our notice. Our contract ran out Memorial Day weekend. Said, okay, thanks, but no thanks. We're not renewing. We're leaving. And so Chuck said he wanted me back. He said, but you're going to have to go to Nashville and work for Bruce, because Chuck and IRA couldn't afford me full time again.
Oh, okay.
So now we moved to Nashville. And we actually lived in Whites Creek, but because that's where Bruce's ranch was. So worked half-time for Longhorn and half-time for Rodeo News. So I wasn't competing anymore. Now I'd go off the Longhorn rodeos when I could, or there was other rodeo nearby. I could. Oh, and Bobby Rowe was really good. While I was living down in Nashville, I had competed in bronc riding with a borrowed saddle and thing, but I really wanted to get into bronc riding. And while I was in Nashville, I became really good friends with Dave Benbow. Dave Benbow was a top 15 bronc rider from South Dakota, and he was living down there, and we became friends. And so he told me what kind of saddle to get and things like that, and so I bought a saddle. And Terry and Karen Langford had a bucking machine down at their rodeo shop.
Yep.
Now you probably know Terry Langford from all of his leather goods. Maybe you've seen him.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yep.
So they were making shaps. They were big time shap makers. We'd go down there it was a big hangout too for all the cowboys and people, Western people hanging out at the Langford store. And Dave Benbow was giving me instructions on, timing and things like that, and on my saddle, and helped me get my saddle set up, things. Mm-hmm. So I met Tanya Tucker while we were down there. She was a teenage girl. She hadn't even had her first hit yet. So It was really something.
At White's Creek.
No, this was in Franklin, Tennessee.
With Langford. Okay.
Yeah, with Langford's, yeah.
Okay.
So we were living in White's Creek. I was working for Rodeo News and Longhorn.
Yeah.
And in Paul's Valley. I would do the paste up on the magazines and things like that. But every month we'd get the layout dummy from Bruce. And so it was like a roadmap. I would know where all the ads were going to go.
I see.
And so he would take an old issue, and he always had his glue pot on his desk, his rubber cement, and he would cut up an old magazine, and he would paste in where the ads were going to go in the magazine. And if it was a new ad, he would pencil it in. And he was quite our cartoonist also. And then he would send that out there, and that was our roadmap for each issue. So I learned a lot about layout. So, like, for example, your regular advertisers, like Nelson Sylvia Buckle Company or the insurance company that was always with us, you never put them on the same page twice. You never put them in the same position twice. They were always in a different position on a different page, and sometimes on a right-hand page, sometimes on a left-hand page. And I just really learned. I really learned a lot about also the articles and things like that about jumps. And that was a personal thing of mine. I learned that working for the school newspaper at Cal Poly, was jumps. You finish an article and you ran out of space. Well, then it says continued on page so and so.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm willing to go to that page, but don't send me to another page and then another page or something baloney like that.
I see.
So that was part of layout. You had to kind of figure out, how can I do this now so the thing only jumps one time?
Yeah.
And so sometimes you had to rearrange things. You had an article jump in there. Okay, now I need more space. Okay, I've got to tear this one up, move it somewhere else, and things like that. So it was always a fun endeavor every month, laying out the magazine. So
and Bruce was self-taught on this, as far as the layouts, and an artist, right?
Well, he had advertising experience. He was worked for an advertising for the newspaper in Waukesha where he lived, and so that's probably where he learned it. I suppose, I don't know. I'm guessing, and you should never assume.
Yeah.
As editor of the magazine, I had to edit the articles. So if I had a magazine and didn't have enough stories, I would have to write stories. I'd have to come up with stories. But also, you were asking me, were people writing stories? Yeah, people were always submitting stories. People wanted to have their story in Rodeo News, right? So they would send it, and some were halfway decent. There was a guy out on the West Coast named Ed Barley, and he was a photographer too. So his articles would always come in, and with his photos, and Ed got promoted. He got 2 cents a word for his articles. But some of these articles would come in, and they would be total crap, So part of being an editor, you had to edit these things. And I'm telling you, one of the biggest compliments you could get as an editor is when somebody read their article in Rodeo News and said, "Oh, I saw my article. It really, really turned out well." And thinking they wrote that article.
Okay, you would tune it up a bit.
I took the meat of what they sent in and basically rewrote the article, which was fine. I never took credit for anyone's article. They're the ones who submitted it. They gave me the juice, and all I did was put a bow on it. So that was part of my job. So
okay,
it was a lot of fun.
And this would be in the late 70s. You're here. You're working the Rodeo News at this point. And the reason I'm putting that together, one of my favorite pictures is Aid in a Van. Came out in the 1980 December-January championship issue, and you wrote that article, right? And of course, great Tom Woods, he took the picture. So 1979, 1980, this is when you're working your second stint at the Rodeo News.
Yep, I think so, or I might have already been back in Oklahoma by that time.
Yeah,
I forget.
Yeah.
But,
okay.
Yeah, no, I was already back in Oklahoma because I remember the story starts at the Pauls Valley Rodeo.
So you're not living in Tennessee at this point?
No. So and we were in Tennessee for like three or so years. Both my daughters were born in Tennessee. So my wife was pregnant with Marla when we got there, and then Aaron came along, and so they're both native Tennesseans. And so I forget what the impetus was. But finally I said, well, okay, Bruce, thanks, but we're going to move back to Oklahoma. And I had already arranged that with Chuck. And so we went back there, and Bruce was fine with it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he had losing me. One of the other things about being editor of Rodeo News, was doing the photo of the year contest every year.
Oh, yeah.
So I would have to come up with judges. So I took over that duty when we were in Tennessee. So we had this one big counter there in the Rodeo News office. And so I'd lay out all the photos because there were different categories. And so I would lay them all out because it was really hard to sit there let's pick out the best one. You just can't do it that way. So I'd say, okay, every year I'd get different judges. So I remember one year Lenore was one of the judges. One year Bobby Rowe was a judge.
Okay.
John Sloan was a judge, but never had the same judges 2 years in a row. And so I always get 3 or 4 different people to be the judges. I was never a judge. And I'd lay them all out, and I'd say, okay, here's the categories. So let's pick the best one in this category. Who's the winner in this category? So then usually that was pretty easy. So, okay, and we set that one aside. Okay, that's the winner in that best black and white photo or whatever. And so, okay, now let's do best action picture or whatever. So we lay out all those, and then we pick that winner. And then best rec, whatever. I forget what all the categories were. So we get a winner in each category. So it made a sensible way to do it. I said, okay, now we're going to take the winners in each of these categories, and we're going to pick the photo of the year out of these. So no one had any trouble with it. That kind of made sense to everybody. Mm-hmm. So that was how we came up with the photo of the year every year.
Okay.
So,
okay.
And so it was like, as Tom Wood, it was like being the world champion, the world champion of rodeo photographers.
That's neat.
Because you got a buckle and you got your photo on the cover of the magazine. And so it was, although Tom Wood had several covers, but over the years.
You bet.
But he won photo of the year twice.
So if I remember,
that was one of the fun things.
Okay. So photo of the year, absolutely. And then in the article, 8 in the Van, you are actually trying to catch a ride from Pauls Valley, Oklahoma, I believe, to Dayton, Ohio.
Yep.
To announce a rodeo. When did you start announcing rodeos?
Okay. Good segue, Doug. So I'm editor of Rodeo News.
Yeah.
Steve Gander calls me. He said, Marty, I'm starting this indoor rodeo company. It's going to be called World's Toughest Rodeo. I'm going to carry 2 announcers with me, and I want you to come be the color commentator. All right, I'll do it. And so I had already started announcing. I don't know what got me doing it, but so I had a sound system. I had 4 speakers and a sound system and all of that stuff, and it's just some local rodeos. And then, I was announcing for Steve. Don't quote me. No, I think I started with Steve. I think in the outdoor rodeo came next.
Okay. Because
you're right. So so I was announcing for Steve, and then different companies were looking for rodeo announcers.
Okay.
That's what happened. Okay, so we're doing these indoor rodeos for Steve Gander, and Ron Partlow was on the other side. He was doing play-by-play. And it worked out really well. And Ron was former trick rider, and so he naturally that was real handy for him to do announce the trick riding because he knew the names of all the tricks and things like that. So it worked out really well. I usually did all the clown gags, and Ron did all the contract acts.
Why did Steve pick you out and say, "Hey, come on, I'm doing this deal, the world's toughest. I want you to do color commentating for me"?
Right. Because he had seen all the articles, all the bios I had written for the International Finals Rodeo program.
I see.
And so he knew that I knew the background and all these different cowboys that were likely to be competing, and could come up with stuff to say about all the other ones. And having grown up in the Bruce Larkey tradition of rodeo, not only as an announcer but just even as a contestant, was a rodeo education, spectator education. One of Bruce's big deals was half your audience is at their first rodeo. Mm-hmm. They don't know what they're watching. Mm-hmm. So you always want to be doing spectator education at every performance.
Okay.
And that made total sense to me, because you want the people to appreciate being there, not to, what's going on, what are they doing now? So that was all. And Bruce had such a unique way of working it into the event. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of adopted that as a rodeo announcer also.
I see.
And so then,
so I gotta ask, what was that like? Going in, you're not announcing on a regular basis, and he calls you up, you're going in, and these are big rodeos in big buildings with World's Toughest. What was that like? Do you remember the first time or a couple of first times where you started doing this? How'd that go?
It was just I guess I've always had the gift of gab, as your listeners are probably figuring out already.
Yeah.
But I guess I didn't have a problem. And the other thing about World's Toughest Rodeo is we had a rehearsal before every performance. Now we couldn't rehearse. I couldn't rehearse my job as color commentator.
Yeah.
But I mean, we knew when things were going to happen. The band was there to rehearse the band at the same time. The contract guys got to rehearse at the same time. And Steve always provided a script. Okay, here's how the events are going to flow.
Yeah.
And he was so anal about stuff. He'd even have a script for the announcers to say. I said, okay. Well, I read it at night. I said, okay, Steve, no offense, but I'm going to change some of this stuff. He didn't mind because
the editor
changed it.
The editor
Yes, exactly. I said, this looks good on paper, but you can't talk this. You cannot talk this. It's a bunch of tongue twisters, one tongue twister after another, and things like that. So I would change it to fit. And so that was another advantage of the rehearsals. So I'm an approved announcer, and I get a call from, I forget the name of the stock contractor, but Carl Rice maybe, but anyway, down in Oklahoma. And they said, okay, our announcer bailed on us, got sick or something came up, and can you come announce the rodeo? I said, sure. So I went down, and it was Wynnewood, Oklahoma, which is like the nearest rodeo to me after Pauls Valley. Okay. So I went down to Wynnewood, like 7 miles away, and announced their rodeo. And one nice thing about Oklahoma, there's a lot of rodeos. So then that happened again. Somebody else needed a rodeo announcer. Yeah. So they called me, can you come announcer? So, and I said, you have a sound system? Yeah, we're all set up. I said, okay, fine. I'd come. So then I said, well, heck, if I'm going to keep doing this, I better have my own sound system. So that's when I went out and bought the sound system and 4 speakers, and, it was a full-time thing. We had an ad in Rodeo News Magazine in the championship issue announcing that I was available, and started getting more rodeos. So the next year, I got a call from Jay Barjay and said, would you come announce for us? And absolutely. I knew who they were. Yep. And met them at the finals and things like that, but never been around them much. But I'll tell you, they're my friends to this day. To my dying day, they'll be my friends. I love the Zinzers. Yep. And just a pleasure to work for. Just the greatest people on earth. I just love them. Yep. Jim Zinzer just had his 80th birthday, right? Yep. So during the rodeo, and we were at one of Zinzer's rodeos during the week, we'd get to the rodeo grounds and, ahead of time from one rodeo to the next and get set up. And then just waiting for the first performance to roll around a couple of days later. So we'd sit around in Jim and Maggie's trailer and play hearts. You ever played hearts?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'd play hearts. And so that was one of our big pastimes during the day. So I wrote my birthday card to Jim. I said, loyal husband, loving father, dedicated grandfather, super stock contractor. I said, and a sorry excuse for a hearts player or something like that.
Yeah.
But I hope you got the joke. After that, so I'm doing, I don't know, 6, 10 or more, I don't know, 8, 10 indoor rodeos a winter with World's Toughest. We're doing 10 to 12 summer rodeos with Zinzer, and then any open weekends in between, I was free to book rodeos with them. So I was making a nice living for my family. So
and still working for the Rodeo News?
No, got my sound system and started booking more rodeos. I told Chuck, I said, well, Chuck, I'm gonna do this. Before I went to work for Steve, I said, okay, here's the deal. I said, I'm gonna do these indoor rodeos. Of course, he already knew who Steve Gander was, and and what a boost in the arm the World's Toughest Rodeo was for area to have 2 big indoor rodeo companies, Longhorn and World's Toughest.
Oh yeah.
And so I said, some days I'm going to have to leave on a Thursday to fly out on a Thursday for rehearsal or whatever, and I'll be back as soon as I can. But in the meantime, you're going to have to manage things here. I said, I'll have everything set up best as I can, but understand there's some times I'll be gone. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Go ahead. So then I got all the outdoor rodeos with Zinzer. And so when that happened, I finally told Chuck, I said, I can't do it anymore. I said, I'm going to have to put in my notice and just be a rodeo announcer.
So your full-time work at this point, Marty, is rodeo announcer.
Rodeo announcer, yeah.
Okay.
So, well, but you never want to let any moss grow on your wheel or whatever. How does that go?
Yeah.
So
Rolling Stone, yeah.
Rolling Stone, yeah. So I started an advertising agency.
Oh, wow.
And so I started making ads for different rodeo people that were specialized in the rodeo field, because I knew how to sell what they had and who they were. So for my commission for creating these ads was 15%. So whatever they were, what Rodeo News was charging them, I would get 15%.
Oh, okay.
And
okay.
Which was fine. I mean, that was the same deal Rodeo News had with any advertiser or advertising agency that brought them ads, because these are camera-ready ads coming in. So it saves them a lot of trouble, and everything's ready to go. And that was augmenting my income during the wintertime when I didn't have rodeos. I was knocking out these ads for the different Cowboys and Cowboys.
Okay.
So
and not competing anymore at this point.
Just ones I could get to nearby, and that was part of the deal with my wife. She said, "I'm not gonna marry you if you're gonna go down the road."
Yeah.
And I said, I understood, but she had no problem with me competing in nearby rodeos. So that was, if we get to it and get back to my home at night. And she was always there, my biggest fan, so that was good. So.
Very cool. And so how many years are you doing the announcing gig and the advertising agency gig?
Well, I think I was a rodeo announcer for 5-6 years, something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, but I was away too much. So then my wife quit traveling with me when I was announcing, and she came out with me the first summer on the summer circuit. The indoor rodeos, it was no big deal because I would go and come back, and sometimes she'd go along. But the first summer she came out, the next summer she got a little part-time job, didn't want to come out on the circuit with me anymore, and we ended up getting divorced. So that was sad news. But it's the Amarillo by morning.
Yeah.
I lost me a wife and a girlfriend somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
Well, that was my song after that.
Oh.
So yeah, too bad. But
very, very sorry for that. And so
anyway, I was trying to get her back. So let me finish this up. So I was trying to get her back, and she said, "What are you going to do besides rodeo?" She said, "I'm not going to marry if you're going to rodeo." I said, "I'll give up rodeo." And she said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I've always wanted to go to law school. I always thought I'd become a lawyer." Now, I told you my dad was a cop.
Yeah.
What I didn't mention was his dad was a lawyer, and his dad's dad was a judge. So I grew up in a legal family.
Right.
The law always interested me, and so I said, "I'll go to law school." So I took the LSAT exam and applied for the University of Oklahoma. And God doesn't shut one door, He doesn't open another.
Right.
I went up for the talk to the admissions. They said, any other year, your LSAT score would have got you in without a problem.
Yeah.
But she said, we just had so many qualified candidates this year, you didn't make the cut. I said, oh, well, okay. So sorry. So I applied to go to law school in California and got accepted. And so the next fall, I started law school in San Diego.
Okay. And then graduated what year from law school?
Law school?
Yeah, because you were doing part-time, right? Night classes or?
I was working General Dynamics full-time during the day, going to law school at night.
Yeah. 3
nights a week, and graduated in
1987. And how many years did it take? I know you're doing night school, so you're not in full-time.
No, but it's a 4-year program. I finished it in 3.5 years.
Holy cow.
Because my best friend in law school and we didn't take any summer breaks.
Okay.
Between first and second year, they made you take a break.
Yeah.
And because you had to take this exam to find out if you were good enough to keep going. And so that kind of broke up the summer. After that, we took horses every summer during the summer. And so we had all our units. So we finished. So we've took the February bar exam, and all our classmates had to wait till the July bar exam because we finished early. But
passed the bar exam, so it's time to get out into the world as a lawyer. Yeah, as an attorney.
As a lawyer, yep. I always wanted to be a prosecutor. I applied with the San Diego District Attorney's Office. I had my girl 6 months out of the year. I mean, that was part of our custody agreement when we got divorced. I had him 6 months. She had him 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And so a lot of people think that's terrible. How could you do that to them? Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, it worked out perfect. It couldn't have been a better deal, because I had them in the fall. They would start school, and then they'd go next semester and back in Oklahoma, come back out. When they came back out, they fell in with the same friends. Like 6 months isn't that long of a time for a kid.
Right.
You know,
right.
they fill in with the same friends again. They hardly miss some,
And why a prosecutor?
I don't know. I guess my dad being a cop, I just, putting bad guys away, doing the right thing. I don't know. It's a good question. I'll tell you, one of the things that helped do it was we had a prosecutor come as a guest speaker at one of our classes.
Okay.
So I had every intent. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I didn't want to be a lawyer set of office. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. So this had a lot to do with me becoming a prosecutor. So this prosecutor came and talked to us, and he said, "You want to go to court? Become a prosecutor. You'll be in court nearly every day."
Mm-hmm.
I raised my hand. Figuratively, I raised my hand. Sign me up.
Okay.
And so my girls were out there, and I was part of the PTA. My mother was a school teacher, and one of the things she said is, you join the PTA right away. She said, parents involved with the PTA, your kids are going to be treated differently.
Okay.
So, and especially for the dad, if the dad's a PTA, she said it's like a hot butter through a hot knife through butter. So I joined the PTA. I think I was the only dad on the PTA for the school. So I was there, lo and behold, one of the women on the PTA was the wife of a prosecutor. Okay. And she said, "Oh, you want to become a prosecutor?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, my husband's a prosecutor. Let me talk to him." So anyway, that kind of helped grease some skids for me. So
you go to work for the San Diego District Attorney's Office.
Yep.
And
so there.
What kind of duties?
I was there for 20.
Yeah. What kind of? You were there how long?
Well, you 23 years. Okay. Well, you start out rotating. You do preliminary hearings. So felonies you have to go to preliminary hearing with the judge to see if you got enough evidence to even bind it over for trial. So you do a tour of those, and then you do a tour of misdemeanor trials. So then I did a tour of those, and then you do a tour of issuing, reading police reports and deciding if we're going to issue the cases. So here's a little story about gift for gab. So I'm doing trials, and I'm like winning all my trials, right off the bat. I was winning all my trials, and I'm like, why? Now that's really funny. I said, all these other people, I was always jealous of my other classmates in college, in law school, because they were all law clerks or legal interns.
Okay.
They had been interns for the DA's office. They had all this legal experience already. They knew the numbers of different violations, code the laws by numbers. Well, yeah, that's a 211, and that's a 487. So I was always jealous of them. But yet now they're lawyers, and I'm winning, and they're not. And I'm thinking, why could that be? And then it dawned on me, our moot court competition, F. Lee Bailey, he got into trouble with the Bar Association back in Massachusetts, but there's no taking it away from him. The guy was a hell of a trial lawyer.
Okay.
And one of the things he told us was he said, "You want to be a good trial lawyer?" He said, "Go become a bartender. Learn how to talk to people." And I said, I realized why I was winning all my trials. I knew how to talk to people. I was older than all my classmates, for one thing.
I see.
But I traveled all over the country, and I talked to people in all different walks of life and things like that, and I knew how to talk to people.
Yeah.
And I never talked down to anybody. Whereas a lot of my classmates, my fellow prosecutors, they would talk like they were talking to lawyers. You can't talk to people like that. It's like spectator education. You got to talk to them where they're at, right? And that was, I think, my big thing. I knew how to talk to people, so it really helped.
So people being judges, being juries, being defendants, being whatever. You're prosecuting,
Yeah. I'm the prosecutor, talking to juries, doing jury trials. That was a big thing.
Okay.
Didn't do too many bench trials. We, as prosecutors, we preferred jury trials. Okay. We're the people's lawyer. You get up, stand up in court. Marty Martin's for the people. The cases are brought. The people of the state of California versus Joe defendant.
Yep.
So I'm there as a people's lawyer. So I'm talking to the people.
Did you work through grand juries and all that sort of thing as well?
I did a stint. One time appeared before the grand jury on a case, a series of drug buys we were doing, undercover drug buys. And so with the grand jury, it was when you do a sting like that, when you do an operation, we call it an operation, you're making all kinds of arrests. You're just building bunches of arrests, and they're all basically the same thing. And you send an undercover police officer in, or you watch the people come in. Well, you can work both ways. You can either have an undercover officer buying the drugs, or you can have an undercover selling drugs.
Yeah.
I think this was mostly buying the drugs. So, and then you would go and make arrests afterwards. You were able to identify these people, and then you'd go sweep them up all at one time. One day you'd have a big roundup, and you knew where all these people were. You'd already identified them through photos and things like that, and had a closed camera system in the police car that you were buying from. It was an undercover car. It didn't look like a police car. And so we knew what they looked like, and then we'd go, you'd get all these arrest warrants issued, and go arrest all these people. And then we'd take them one by one in front of a grand jury. It's basically the same evidence over and over again. You didn't have to keep repeating the same evidence.
For 5 years, you were assigned to a drug and gang task force. Talk
Right.
a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, I started out as a deputy DA doing the usual stuff, doing preliminary hearings and misdemeanor trials and issuing and things like that. And then I had an opportunity to go to this task force, which is a really nice job because you're kind of independent from the rest of the office crew. And with a task force, you've got representatives from numerous different agencies working together. So there was 6 or more county police departments, and then the district attorney's office. So when I started, there was 3 prosecutors in it. It's got bigger. But the nice thing about this task force was let me back up and mention this about the district attorney, Ed Miller. When he started this, first he started with a gang unit. We were, I think, the first county in the country that have a gang unit. So San Diego was the 4th biggest district attorney's office in the country. So you have Los Angeles, New York, Houston, and then San Diego. And at that time, we had 160 prosecutors. And before I retired, there was 300 prosecutors. Mr. Miller said he wanted to start a gang unit. And he talked to this guy who grew up in the hood and things like that. And his name was Keith Burton. Keith said, well, Mr. Miller, he said, if you're going to do that, he said, we're going to have the DAs be able to go out in the field. And if they're going to go out in the field, they're going to have to be armed. And Mr. Miller was not one that liking his DAs to be packing, but he said, okay, do it. And when I was in United for Drug and Gang Enforcement, was a judge unit. So I got my concealed weapons permit, and we had county issued body armor for whenever we went in the field. And I can tell you as a prosecutor, there's nothing like trying cases where you've actually been on the scene to see what happens, or you're there when the search is going on. Now, the prosecutor's never part of the search. We can sit there and watch, and we can give advice to the cops on the scene. And so more than once, I had defense attorneys come into court and try blowing smoke up the judge's butt about, well, this happened, this happened. I said, no, excuse me, Your Honor, I was there. That did not happen. So that shut them down in a hurry. They had fallen for their clients' lies and thought that was the way it really happened. I've always told people, I said I had the two best jobs in the world. I was a professional rodeo cowboy, and I was a prosecutor. Putting a good ride on a tough bronco or putting a bad guy in prison. They're both the same level of excitement.
Okay.
But so I did that for 3 years, and then got assigned to a different task force, which was I became the liaison to the narcotic task force and 10 other police agencies. So after that, I didn't even go to court anymore. I was on call 24 hours a day to give legal advice, review search warrants, and that was the main thing I did during the day. And then I did training. I did police training for all these different departments. And because one thing with the law is always changing, and you always have new people coming in. You know, young cops coming in, and you never know what they got taught in the academy. And so I was always retraining or training these new cops. And when I did training, I always told them, I said, you might be hearing something you already know, but it's understand there's people here who never heard it. So bear with me while I train the young guys, and you get refreshed on what you already knew.
Yeah.
It was a good job, 23 years putting bad guys away. I liked it.
So Marty, what was that like going from, you talked about being out in the field of play. You were out there, you had body armor on, you were armed. I read in a 40-month period, you prosecuted a record 437 defendants.
Yes, yeah,
that's a lot of going.
It was. I mean, it almost drove me to a nervous breakdown at one point. I finally called my boss, my immediate boss, and I said, Bob, I need some help down here, and so he sent me a law clerk to help carry part of the load. But so, and as tough as a record as that was, I mean, the first said it, damn if a few years later a female deputy didn't come in and beat it. So
really?
Good for her.
Okay, good for her. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what was that transition like? You're, almost like I compare it to when you were rodeoing. You're nodding your head, you're riding your barebacks, you're competing, and then you shift, and it's a career change. You shifted to being a rodeo announcer. So what was it like to come out of the field of play and step back and not in court every day now?
Well, I heard it from Mike Duplessis. No, I mean another Mike. Mike Fletcher.
Mike Fletcher.
Mike Fletcher's. He said this one time. He said, "You don't quit rodeo. Rodeo quits you."
Okay.
And I found that to be true. I remember I was at the Detroit Rodeo, State Fair Rodeo in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the State Fair Coliseum indoor rodeo that I told you earlier. This was the summertime rodeo. This is the actual State Fair going on.
Mm-hmm.
And can I digress and tell you a funny story about that rodeo?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, it was a J-Bar J rodeo, and Willie Nelson was performing there. And just, like the venue, his staged venue was just not a walking distance from the rodeo arena. So Maggie Zinser came by and said, "We're all invited to hear the concert." So we went through the back way and we came into the stage. And so we were all standing right in front of the stage. We had like the best seats in the house.
Oh, wow.
And well, you probably have heard his song "On the Road Again."
You bet.
Well, it was like the rodeo anthem. I mean, because what's his name? Brooks wasn't hot yet, but it was a song "Rodeo" and things like that. But
Garth Brooks, yeah,
Garth Brooks. So I mean, that became a very popular rodeo song too. But most of our rodeo songs back then were the Wyoming Cowboy.
Chris Ledoux.
Chris Ledoux, yes.
Yeah.
He would record in Nashville, by the way, when I was working in Nashville for Rodeo News and Longhorn, because they always advertised in Rodeo News magazine. His dad, who lived in the Davidson County outside Nashville, always invited us to come down to Chris's recording sessions. So Chris was a year ahead of me in school, and we were in different circuits in college rodeo. But I mean, I knew of him from college rodeo. But so I would go down. I sat in a couple of his recording sessions.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very interesting process. He's a really nice guy, which didn't surprise me at all. And so, it's really interesting. Wow. But anyhow, at the Willie Nelson concert, and Willie opens with "On the Road Again." And, of course, all of us Cowboys went to whooping and hollering, playing our song.
Yeah.
And so when have you ever been to a concert and heard this same song twice in one concert?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Ever had that happen?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, he finished with it. We were all cheering. He did it again.
Oh, wow.
He just went right back into another whole set on the road again. And of course, we all went nuts, screaming and yelling. But it was a very memorable thing. So it was a good career, though. I love being a prosecutor. It was just a great job.
And so you went from the courtroom, you took a bit of a break, and you went, as you said, the district attorney's liaison to other enforcement agencies and the training as such. What was that like to transition? You're not in the courtroom every day. You're not in the field of play every day.
It was different. I was co-located with the cops. I had to look out my office. I could see, cops out there every day. Mm-hmm. And so many times they would come into my office to just chat or to have warrants reviewed or something like that. And they said, "Well, don't you miss going to court?" And I said, "Absolutely." Yeah. I said, "I'm a trial lawyer." I said, "I miss going to court."
Yeah.
I said, "But this is where they sent me." So, and then before I retired, they transferred me out. I'd done it for 12 years, and they transferred me back out to a courtroom position. So that was really nice, and I got to do one more trial before I retired. I had one prep ready to go, and then the damn guy fled out. I mean, for trial, so, which is fine. At least we got what we wanted out of it. I didn't get the fun of putting on a jury trial, though. But I got one more trial in before I retired, and it was good.
And you received a number of commendations throughout your career. But tell us about the big one.
I did. I got accommodations from the FBI, from the Postal Service, from a lot of the local police departments. But the biggest one was being voted Prosecutor of the Year for the California Narcotics Officers Association. So this was a statewide organization. And, of course, this is when I was in the judge unit, primarily doing narcotics work. And it was a big thing. It was a big thing.
Well, congratulations on that. That is so neat.
Yeah, still have the plaque on the wall.
Okay. And what a big life. What a big life. Gosh, as I think about the things we've talked about today, my goodness, huge. Now, you did travel a bit with Tom Orr, the Mountain Man, on History's channel, the Mountain Men.
Yes.
You got any Tom Orr stories?
Yes, well, Tom and I, during the winter, it was pretty much shut down, our IRA rodeos. But there was a little indoor rodeo once a month over in Bass Lake, Indiana. Tom and I would usually go over there. It's just like a one-day rodeo, but we would have to get there the day in advance, stay overnight, and go to this rodeo during the day in this little indoor arena. It was always interesting. Remember I told you the thing about Red Duffin and the kid getting stepped on by the bull and swallowing it?
Yeah.
Well, there was a similar situation happened at this rodeo. I don't know what happened, but the kid was choking on something, and is there a doctor in the house? Sure enough, there was a doctor in the house, and he had to perform a tracheotomy on this kid.
Are you kidding? Wow.
Cut his neck open so he could breathe and put a straw. He was asking for a straw, and he ended up using the tube end off of a pen.
Like a big pen.
Like a big pen, but it was a different one of those pens you could twist apart.
Yeah.
But he didn't have any tools with him, so I was able to offer my pocket knife, and my pocket knife cut a guy's neck open. So,
oh my gosh! So you assisted. You assisted in tracheotomy. Well,
yeah, exactly.
Back in the early days when you were in college, you had thought about being a vet, so not that far off some of your aspirations. So, Marty, were there any other events that you worked?
Well, I did ride some saddle broncs. I don't know if I mentioned that previously, but I was traveling with Tom Orr, and he was a top 15 bronc rider, and so I kind of always was in that shadow of wanting to be a bronc rider. I mean, I've always considered saddle bronc riding, the premier rodeo event. It was the first rodeo event, but one time I snuck off to this little open rodeo in southern Wisconsin and borrowed Tom's old turtle saddle. Now, Cowboys Turtle Association.
Yeah.
They had sanctioned certain types of saddles to be used in saddle bronc riding. They still had horns on them. So a lot of the cowboys would cut the horns off, but Tom still had the horn on it. It was a matter of pride with him. But it had a broken tree. But it was a saddle, and it was held together. So anyway, I entered the saddle bronc riding at this open rodeo. Well, little did I know, when you buck off, you're supposed to roll over on your belly down to the ground.
Yes.
So I bucked off, and as I bucked off with my back to the ground, I bucked off to the left, and I had my right foot still in the stirrup.
Oh, my. Okay.
So I hung up. I hung up upside down. So my toe is caught in the stirrup, and all my weight is hanging on this one stirrup, and so I can't get loose because the pressure of my weight holding it in.
Yeah.
And so the horse went 3 or 4 bucks before I knew my boots were loose enough. I wore special boots for bronc riding, were loose enough I could get out of them. So I twisted my foot. But every time this horse would buck, his feet would come under his belly, of course. And that's where I was hanging upside down. It was like a trick rider doing the death drag or whatever they call it.
Only truly in the death drag position.
So, I would feel its fetlock brush my face. I was waiting to get my ear kicked off, but thank God I got out of it okay with a sore ankle. So that was one of my saddle bronc riding stories.
Yeah.
But I entered the bronc riding out in California a few times, but a lot of people don't know that I was into bull riding some. And I never liked bulls. Mostly I just did exhibition. I told you about how Tom Hartzell at HRC Rodeo, they were real, and his wife Faye, they were real good about putting Tom and I up to fit our schedule as we were going and getting us set up. And so I was always happy to help out when they were shorthanded. So a couple of times he asks me, would I get on a bull? Yeah, sure, get on a bull. Well, anyway, Fredericktown, Missouri one time, I ride this bull exhibition because I needed bull riders to fill out the performance. And Ben Jordan was sitting on the back of the chutes. Now, he's a former world champion bull rider, but he kind of retired from that. And so I get off and come back to the chutes, and Ben says, Marty, he said, you're a natural bull rider. You should be entering the bull riding, not the bareback riding. And I laughed. I said, well, Ben, thank you. I said, but I just don't like bulls. I don't like being around. I mean, even when I rode them, I got hurt.
Right.
And in fact, I think it was that one or another one at one of Tonta's rodeos on there. I got bucked off and I landed on the side of my ribs because my body was kind of arched that way. And so we left the rodeo and going down the road, stopped for gas at this truck stop. I go in to pee, and I'm peeing blood.
Oh.
Now, you think that doesn't scare a guy.
Oh.
I think we were in Poplar Bluff the next morning or something like that, and I went to a doctor. And once again, the good old IRA medical insurance came through. That was like having a gold card when you went to a doctor's office and saw that Lloyd's of London hospitalization plan. And the doctor said, no, he said, you probably just bruised your kidney or something like that. So it was nothing to worry about. Then I mentioned my rodeo team coach, Doug Butler. Well, he was real big about us being all-around cowboys. He said, you should be able to look at your other teammates and be able to give them advice if you see where you could be helping them. So he had us all dogging steers and stuff like that. So I never entered the steer wrestling, but I know at IFR 1, I got a job with Butch Berry. We were pushing out the steers and the calves during the timed events. But before the rodeo started, we had to throw down all the steers. I think there was like about 20 of them, 18 or 20. And so we would catch them right out of the gate and then hold on to them as best we could till we get them stopped and then throw them. But so that impressed a lot of guys who didn't know I knew how to do that.
Well, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah. Okay. One other, my all-around experience.
Yeah.
I was at this was at Conesville, Iowa. They were short of, this was not the one where I rode the bull. They were short of calf ropers. So Tom says, Marty, would you rope a calf? I said, no, but I'll make a pretend at it. So I knew how to rope, but not off a horse. I could throw a loop and catch a steer dummy or whatever, or a hay bale. So anyway, borrowed somebody's horse. I back into the box. I didn't been enough rodeos to know what to do. Had the loop tucked up under my arm. Had the pig and string in my mouth. So I nod, and the horse goes running. I twirl my loop and throw it. And damn if I nearly didn't catch it. It just missed the calf's ears. And I said, oh, shit, darn it, what would I have done?
Yeah. Did you know how to tie? Did you know how to tie at that point? Groundwork?
No, I didn't. Okay. No, I hadn't been out there. Now, when on the college rodeo team, that was one of the things we all had to learn how to do. But no, I
at that point
didn't know how to tie that. So, yeah, it would have been a terrible scene if I got off it.
So Marty Martin's all-around cowboy.
Yeah, right.
And we hear rodeo athletes, at least I have heard over the years, everybody's got a bit of a superstition. When I heard if you're going to put your hat on the bed, or don't put your hat on the bed, I believe it was. Anyway, There's all kinds of these superstitions. What do you got there? Yeah,
don't put your hat, always have your crown, your hat on the crown, otherwise the luck will fall out.
Right.
Besides the fact that it wrecks your brim if you put it on the desk the other way. But I knew stories where guys, they'd have a motel room and some guy put his hat on the bed and they'd kick him out of the room. He'd have to go sleep in the car or the truck. They would share a room.
It was that serious?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, very serious, some guys. But one year at Sparta, Michigan, I don't know if you've heard of that, was always this big Labor Day weekend rodeo. And after the performance every night, they have a big bonfire gathering type of thing for all the people around there. And so this was like about 1967, I think, 68. And like the top hat, the best hat you could buy was a 10X Beaver by the American Hat Company was the hat.
Okay.
And back then they cost $100. So, I mean, back in those days, $100 was an expensive hat, right?
You bet.
So Glenn Bird had bucked off his bull, and he blamed that on his hat. And he takes off this $100 hat and he throws it in the bonfire. And we just sat there with our jaws open. What? So, I mean, it was amazing. But Sparta was a big rodeo. One year, I know Tom Orr and I, we were entered in Dayton, Iowa the next day. So we left Sparta at night, and it's like, 600 miles.
Oh, yeah.
It's about a 10-hour drive.
Yeah.
To Dayton, Iowa. And this was before, this was like late 60s. There was no internet system yet. It was all state highways and county highways. And it was a heck of a run. Oh, and that reminds me of another story. One night we were somewhere in Iowa, not the Labor Day weekend, and I'm driving, and I run out of gas. And so I pull into a gas station. I'm on fumes, and I'm coasting in. And, of course, the gas station's closed. It's like midnight or 1 in the morning. And so Tom was asleep in the camper, and I wake him up. He said, I just go to bed, and we'll get the gas in the morning. Well, little do we know, and I think Tom already knew this too, the local police guy came by and knocked on our camper.
Oh, wow.
So, okay, so we woke up. He said, need gas? Yeah. Well, I guess in these small towns, they give the county constable or whatever the keys to the gas pump.
Really?
So he unlocked the thing. We pumped the gas and then paid cash, of course. And I don't even know credit cards existed yet, but
Yeah.
and then gave him cash and a little extra and was on our way. So that was a neat little thing to learn. That some of these towns, the local cop has the key for the pump.
Yeah. And
But
you talk about that back in that day. I mean, did you have cash always? Did you have traveler's checks? There were no credit cards back then.
No, yeah, it was always cash.
Always cash. And what happened when you got low on cash? Because very, very possible you're winning, but they haven't paid off yet. The money's behind you somewhere.
Yeah, well, some of us had gas cards. A lot of times I had a gas card for emergencies. And speaking of cash, and I've mentioned Ron Martin before, Ron Martin is Mr. Businessman. So whether you were in his car or if he was someone else, he'd bring his cigar box. And the first thing he would do is that cigar box would go up on the dash, and everyone would have to pony up $20. I mean, of course, gas was a lot cheaper back then.
Right.
So everyone would put $20 in the gas fund, and then Ron knew how much everyone was anteed up, and he knew how long until we used all that money up. Then he'd ask for more money, for more gas. But he was Mr. Business. I'm telling you, he was a heck of a guy to travel with.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to tell you about Dayton, Iowa. Dayton, Iowa, because a lot of people don't know this IRA history. Tonch Hartzell, his rodeo company was H Bar C. I don't know if you've heard of that, H Bar C. Well, where did the C come from? H was for Hartzell. C was for Claybrook. He and Wendell Claybrook were partners when they started out, and then they went their separate ways. Well, Wendell Claybrook had his own rodeo company then, and he always had that rodeo at Dayton, Iowa. So
okay.
He was a heck of a guy. He didn't have as many rodeos as Tonch, but he was a heck of a good guy. He had this one big red bull with only one horn, and so everyone called it the Red Rhinoceros.
Oh.
So it was a tough bull to ride.
And that Dayton arena is very large and kind of odd shaped, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. Good. Yeah, have you been there?
I've announced it twice, back in the early 2000s. Yep.
Yeah, so it's like a natural amphitheater. Yep. And people are sitting up on that hill, and it is a big arena.
Yeah.
And we spoke about Ron Partlow and his brother who had the rodeo company. And there was another brother, I can't remember his name, but he was a smoker. And he had this was his shtick. He'd ask people if they had a match, and they would hand him a book of matches, right? He'd light the match, light a cigarette, and he'd take the book of matches and throw it on the ground.
Not give it back.
No, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
So they retrieve their matches or whatever, and maybe never lend them a light again. Well, so we were at Dayton, Iowa, and so he asked somebody for a light, and the guy hands him a lighter. So the rest of us are sitting there watching. Oh no, is he going to? Sure enough, he lights a cigarette, throws a lighter on the ground. I wish I could remember his name.
Yeah,
one of the Partlow brothers.
One of the Partlow boys. And pre-rodeo ritual. Did you have a ritual? I mean, did you eat before you rode? Did you anything like that?
No, I mean, well, they always did stretching exercise and stuff like that. Always said a prayer during the national anthem and this. And one thing I never did, I mean, I'm not patting myself in the back, but this just wasn't me. I never wished for anyone to buck off. I just always wished for everybody to do their best. So I was at a rodeo one time, and I won't mention names, but I won second and he won third. And he said, well, Marty, I should have won second. And I said, you're right, because I should have won first.
You're still behind me, you said. Still behind me.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, but like that movie, second place is the first loser.
That's right.
I always remembered that one.
That's right. Yeah.
So, but it was a great fun traveling with Tom. You know, Tom, he knew a lot of rodeo songs, and he would sing in the car, usually off key, but it was always a lot of fun. And we swapped stories. But I told you about when I started out my first year, I went to 3 rodeos, and next year I went to 7. But so it was one of those first years, but it was Grays Lake. I think it was the second year, Grays Lake, Illinois. And of course, Tom was an easy guy to know. I mean, like everyone. He was like a magnet. People just always came around, and everyone knew him. He was always cutting it up, and just a fun, really nice guy. And so we were in this bar, and so we were facing Tom. Tom was leaning on the bar, and we're chatting with Tom. And over behind Tom, down the barway, was couple of young girls, talking and chatting away, and one of them was this really shiny blonde. And so we're sitting there, we're eyeballing these girls, and somebody says, "Hey, Tom, do you see that blonde down there?" Tom looks over his shoulder. Yeah, I'll probably sleep with her tonight.
Oh,
and so I remember this one guy who I was with. He's Tom. You might be good, but you're not that good.
Yeah.
And so he turns around. He motions for this girl to come over. He said, "Fellas, I'd like you to meet my wife."
Oh my goodness. Okay.
But that was the kind of clowning around he would do.
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. Yeah, it was Jan.
Okay. Okay.
When Tom was with the 101 Ranch Wild West show, he told me about this. I forget the name of their rodeo announcer. It might have been Curly Denman or something like that. But this guy, he always would start the rodeo by dropping an M80 or some fireworks off the announcer stand.
Oh,
so there'd be this big bang before he would start talking. Tom's dad, Chike, was the pickup man at the rodeos, at those Wild West shows, and he was a steer wrestler. He rode this big horse called Old Red, and so he would always lead the grand entry. And so he'd carry the American flag in the grand entry, and they would come in and do the serpentine and all this stuff. And so finally, Old Red got so old he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't be used for a pickup horse. So they would just turn him loose on the rodeo grounds. And when the music started for the grand entry, Old Red would get in line.
Really?
He would get in line with the other horses, and he would just do the whole serpentine. He knew the pattern, and he knew like he was retired. But I'm still going to go out there, and so because he did it every time, the announcer started telling the whole story then about this retired rodeo horse, and he comes out there and does it every time. So, wow. Kind of a neat story.
That is a neat story. What did you say? Mike Fletcher said what? You don't quit rodeo?
Rodeo quits you.
Right. Marty, it's been a blast. Thank you for being on here today and sharing all your stories. And, man, what a life, dude.
Thanks again for doing what you're doing.
All right. Thank you.
All right, my friend. Yep. Adios.
Adios. Bye-bye. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of our podcast with Marty Martins, rodeo cowboy, rodeo announcer, lawyer, and state prosecutor for the state of California, and published author. If you do, please share with your friends. Word of mouth is always the best advertising. To make your listening easier, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can find us on YouTube. And all these streaming platforms. Simply search for Beyond the Chutes and follow us, like us, rate us, subscribe. Subscribe because then you'll be notified when our episodes come up, and we try every Tuesday at 4 o'clock to publish our episodes. And while you're at it, give us comments. Let us hear from you. Tell us who you'd like to hear about. Tell us what you'd like to hear about. And if you got reels, we got reels. We got Facebook reels. Check them out on Beyond the Chutes Facebook page and click follow. And I want to say thank you to Parasite Systems for their support with our podcast. Our show is presented by Parasite Systems, who help vet clinics and animal owners experience the power of sight. And brand new in 2025, the all-in-one analyzer featuring FecalSight AI, HemoSight AI, and FlowSight AI technologies. They now offer 37 tests to help veterinary practices save time, money, and pets. And we've got a coupon for mail-in testing of your horses, your dogs, and your cats. It is BTC 023 for 50% off your mail-in testing. All you got to do is go online to Parasite, SIGHT, systems.com, order up your kit, and make sure you tell them about your BTC 023 for 50% off. And hey, I want to give a great big thank you to the IRA Project Facebook group for all their help and guidance, Tim Sparks and Marlon Harris. And I'm going to throw Tom Woods in there for all the great photographs that he has shared with us here at BTC. And they have really helped us connect with the rodeo greats of the IPRA. And if you tie these stories with the pictures from Tom Woods, you've got money. This is Beyond the Chutes Rodeo Podcast. Until next time, my name is Doug Simcox. Thank you for listening.